The vote comes back before noon. Gaius Gracchus is tribune for the second time. His brother never made it to the second vote. 122 BC. The Forum. This is Roman Knights. We go back. We listen. We stay a while. 10 months earlier. He is the second son of Cornelia. Rome knows what that means now. BC 123. January. His first day. Chapter 1. The wait of the first morning. Before anyone else was awake. He was in the Forum at the 3rd hour of the night. The torches were still burning. The paving stones were slick with the cold that settles into stone when no one is walking on it. He walked the square alone. The rostra was dark. He stood at the base of it and looked up. He had been in this Forum many times. With his brother when he was young. Alone in the years after Sardinia. Watching other men speak. Watching how they moved and did not move. Watching where they looked and what they did with their hands. He had prepared for this morning for more than 2 years. He had not slept. This was not from fear. He had felt fear before. In Sardinia. A road. A ridge. A decision made faster than decisions are supposed to be made. That had been fear. This was something else. The feeling before the thing. You have been building toward for a long time. It does not have a name. It is not anxiety. It is the body knowing something large is about to begin. He put his hand on the stone of the rostra base. The stone was cold. It was rough at the edges where it had been cut. Smooth. Where hands and time had worked it. His brother had stood on this platform. He did not stay on that thought. He let it pass the way you let a cart pass on a narrow road. You step back. You wait. It passes. Then you continue. He went over the speech once more in his mind. Not the words. He did not use notes when he spoke. He had never used notes. The words were not the thing to rehearse. The sequence of ideas. The places where you pause. The places where you speed up because speed creates the feeling of a conclusion approaching. He had been thinking about the direction. He had decided to turn right months ago. To face the crowd and not the Senate. He had been debating this with himself since Sardinia. The debate had ended in autumn. The direction was right. The Forum did not know this was coming. The Senate would understand it immediately. They would understand what it meant before the first word. A tribune who does not face. The Senate is a tribune who has already decided where his argument lies. In the crowd. Not in the building with the furniture that knew the old names. He did not intend to be subtle about this. He had been subtle about things in the past when subtlety served the purpose. The direction of a body on a platform was not one of those things. He needed the crowd to understand before the first word that they were the point. The stone was cold under his hand. He took his hand away. The city began waking around the 4th hour. Carts on stone. The sound travels in cold air further than in warm. He could hear them from the far side of the Palatine. The smoke from the first fires. The smell of bread beginning. A man crossed the square without seeing him. A torch carrier. Going home from the night shift somewhere near the temples. He walked without looking up. He had walked this route many times. And the route did not require looking up. Gaius watched him cross. He thought about that man. Where he was going. What would change for him after today? Not today specifically. What would change if the grain came down to the price he was planning? What would change if the road depot outside the Subura worked the way he had drawn it? The carpenter who could buy his tools back. The woman who stopped cutting the bread in half. He did not know the torch carrier's name. He would not know it. This was one of the things he had decided. About the work. You do not get to know the names of the people who benefit. You know the numbers, the price, the tons of grain that moved through the depot in the first month, the miles of road that changed a 2-day trip to one. You know the system. You cannot know the people inside it. His brother had known specific people. He had sat with farmers on their land. He had seen the specific faces of the specific problem. This had made him thorough. It had also made him believe. that the right answer, clearly stated, would be received correctly, because the people in front of him had faces. The faces were obvious. The problem was obvious. The solution was obvious. Gaius had thought about this carefully. He had decided to know the numbers. The crowd began arriving before the 6th hour. They came from the directions he expected. The Subura, the Aventine, the area below the Esquiline. They moved through the square with the particular energy of people who have come early on purpose. Not everyone. Not a crowd yet. The beginning of one. He watched from the edge of the colonnade. They did not know he was there. They were finding their positions. Talking quietly. Some were not talking. A few children brought by older brothers or fathers. He watched the children. They were not there for the speech. They were there because they had come with someone. In 10 years some of them would say, I was in the forum the first morning. They would not remember the speech. They would remember the cold and the torches and the feeling of early. He thought, that is something. He put on his toga at the edge of the portico. No ceremony. No attendants making the folds right. He had learned to do it himself. His mother had taught him when he was young. She said a man who cannot put on his own toga has given someone else something he should keep. He had never hired someone for the folds. He walked to the rostra. He climbed the steps. He turned right. The moment he turned, he knew. Not from the crowd. The crowd had not reacted yet. He knew from his own body the rightness of the direction. He was facing the forum. The Senate House was at his back. The whole square was in front of him. The torches, the columns, the stones. He had walked at the 3rd hour of the night. The smoke from the city rising over the rooftops. He could see the faces. When you face the Senate, you face a building. When you face the crowd, you face people. This sounds obvious. It is not obvious until you stand on the platform and feel the difference. Building does not look back. People look back. He felt the crowd look at him. He opened his mouth. He did not shout. The voice that carries in a large square is not the loudest voice. It is the clearest one. The one that keeps the ends of sentences. He had spent a year working on the ends of sentences. He moved when he spoke. He walked the length of the rostra. He had planned the movement. Not every gesture. The instinct for movement when thinking. He had always thought while moving. The forum was the largest place he had thought in. His body knew what to do. The crowd leaned toward him. He had 2 hours to tell them what he had planned for 10 years. He started at the beginning. He told them what grain cost. He told them what it should cost. He told them who decided the difference. Where that decision was made. Why the 2 rooms were the problem he was here to address. He did not mention his brother. Not once. Chapter 2. How the grain law actually worked. The price before the law was 6 1/3 asses per modius. This number meant nothing on its own. A family of 4 in the Subura spent roughly 1/3 of all income on grain alone. Not bread. Grain before grinding. The grinding was extra. The baking was extra. You stopped counting where you had to. The grain law set the price at 6 1/12 asses per modius. The difference sounds small. In a crowded calculation, a small number is not small. The carpenter who sold his tools in autumn was not destroyed by one bad harvest. He was destroyed by a margin. 1/3 of an as per modius. Sustained over 4 years. In a city where you cannot grow your own food. Where you cannot wait for a better month. A margin is a slow thing. It works gradually. You do not see the working. You see the result when the tools are gone. Gaius understood margins. He had sat with the numbers in Sardinia. Not the dramatic ones. The ones that accumulated. A family budget at the grain price. Before the law. The same budget after. The difference was not food. It was what happened to everything else in the budget. When the grain line went down a fraction. The shoe repair you could now afford. The medicine that moved from impossible to possible. The iron tool you did not have to sell. He had done this calculation for 12 kinds of families. A day laborer. A craftsman. A freedman with a small trade. A widow with 2 children. A veteran who had come back and Found the farm sold while he was fighting. He had the calculation. In a document. The document was in his desk. He had not shown it to the Senate. He had not shown it because the Senate did not need to be convinced of the numbers. The Senate knew the numbers. Some members had spent years in provinces studying these numbers, learning how to extract the correct amount from people who had the numbers and nothing else. The Senate understood margins very well. This was not a conversation about the math. The distribution system required warehouses. He had designed the warehouse locations himself. He went to the docks and walked the access roads. He went to the Aventine and walked the streets that ran to the distribution points. He went to the Subura at the 7th hour. Afternoon trade was heavy. He counted how long it took to move from the southern entrance to the main square. 12 minutes. With the current traffic. 7 if there were no carts. He needed the distribution points to be reachable without losing half a day. A man who stands in line loses work time. The work time is part of the budget. If the line costs more in lost wages than the savings, the law is not doing its job. You have to count the standing time. No one had told him to count the standing time. He had counted it because it was in the calculation. He placed the main distribution depot at the northern end of the docks, walking distance from the Aventine, reachable from the Subura in 25 minutes. Not convenient, usable. He put 2 satellite points further north. He put the access routes in the law. The routes were part of the law. You could not build a warehouse without the route, and you could not have the law without the route. The Senate called this overreach. He called it a grain law. The first month of distribution was August. He was there before dawn. Not officially. He stood at the edge of the dock square and watched. He had a hat and a plain cloak. Nobody was looking for him in a plain cloak at the dock at dawn. He watched the line form. He watched the pace of distribution. He had a tablet. He was counting. 312 men in the first 2 hours. Average time in line, 11 minutes. Shorter than he had estimated. The clerks were better than he had budgeted for. He wrote the number. He would adjust the estimate for the second depot. A man near the front of the line received his allotment. He was old. He walked slowly because of something with his left. He had a bag over his shoulder. He put the grain in the bag. He stood there for a moment at the front of the square, with the bag on his shoulder. He looked at the bag. He turned and walked back toward the Aventine. Gaius watched him go. He wrote nothing after this. He had the numbers. The numbers were what the system needed. What that man felt when he lifted the bag was not in the calculation. He had built a system. The system was not the whole thing. It was never the whole thing. He put the tablet in his cloak. He went back to the office. The Senate asked in a committee session that January how the warehouses would be funded. He had the document ready. He had been ready since the previous spring. The treasury surplus from the previous 3 years. He went through the calculation line by line. He showed the import duty adjustments. He showed the cost reduction per line item. He showed the 5-year projection. The committee listened. The senator from the northern districts asked 3 questions in a row. All 3 contained the same objection in different phrasing. Gaius answered each of them with the same number in different phrasing. The committee approved the warehouse funding. This was not a victory. He did not feel it as a victory. He had done the work correctly. Approval was the correct result of correct work. You do not celebrate arithmetic. You go home and start the next calculation. By the end of the first year, the grain law had touched 300,000 families. Not helped. Touched. He was precise about this. Touch means the law existed in their budget. Helped is a different claim. He did not know who it helped and in what ways. The price had moved. The distribution had functioned. The first 3 months matched the projection within 4%. 4% was good. It meant the system was sound. He wrote the 4% in his record and underlined it once. He thought about the man with the bag on his shoulder walking back toward the Aventine. He thought about the woman who stopped, cutting the bread in half. He underlined the 4%. The next calculation was the roads. Chapter 3, the courts. The jury reform was harder to explain and easier to feel. He had read the 40 years of records alone. Not in the committee. Before the committee. He had requested the case files from the archive in October. The archive had sent a young man with a cart and a confused expression. 40 years of provincial extortion cases. The cart was small. The files were not. He had read them over 9 days. He read them in the order they were filed. Name, province, charge, verdict. The reading was not complicated. The reading was long. Knowing a system produces a certain outcome is one thing. Reading every individual instance of that outcome over 9 days is another. He finished on the 10th morning. He sat with the last file for a while. Then he wrote the list. A senator who governed a province could tax above the legal rate. He could award contracts to men who paid him. He could move public property into private hands through transactions that were individually illegal. None of this produced a verdict. When a senator was accused, a jury of senators decided the case. They had governed provinces. They had done the same things or versions of the same things. They knew where the legal line was. They knew precisely how far over it you had to step before they would say so. They said so rarely. 40 years of cases. The number was not dramatic. The number was consistent. A consistent number over a long period is not a run of bad luck. It is a system working as designed. He brought the list to the committee session. He did not read it aloud. He placed it on the table. The committee looked at it. No one disputed the numbers. You cannot dispute a list. A list is a list. You can dispute what the list means. The committee disputed what the list meant. One senator said, "It means there were few violations." Gaius looked at him for a moment. He said, "Then the new jury will have very little work to do." The senator did not reply. The room understood. The senator had no counter that did not require admitting what the list demonstrated. Men in that position go quiet. Going quiet is the tell. Gaius filed this. He did not use it again in that room. He used the structure of it in every room after. The mechanism was not a new court. The existing law. The existing court. A different set of people. Making the decisions. He added equestrians to the jury pool. The business class. Men with capital but without the old name. Men who had money. In provincial trade. Men who had seen what a province looked like when someone ran it as personal revenue. They were not neutral. No juror is neutral. The question is which direction the non-neutrality runs. A senatorial jury had reasons to acquit. An equestrian jury had different reasons. The law did not say this. The law said, the jury pool is expanded. The effect was what the law did not say. He had designed it this way on purpose. You do not write the effect into the law. You write the mechanism. The effect follows from the mechanism. If you write the effect into the law, the opposition attacks the effect directly. If you write the mechanism, they have to attack the mechanism and explain why expanding the pool is wrong. The explanation requires them to say, we should keep the pool narrow. Saying that requires them to say why. The why is the problem. The why is the list. The Senate called it an attack on the Constitution. He had written the response before the opposition formed. You attack the expected argument before it arrives. Put the counter-argument in circulation before the argument. The argument arrives already answered. His response, the Constitution requires fair hearings. A fair hearing requires that the jury have no direct interest in the verdict. When accused and jury are from the same class, the interest is direct, whether anyone states it or not. Adding equestrians does not change the Constitution. Makes the Constitution work the way it was supposed to work. The Senate said, this is not how it was met. He said, show me where it was met. The Senate consulted archives. They found texts that supported their position. He found texts that supported his. This is always what the archives contain. The law passed. Verres was governor of Sicily nearly 50 years later. He took from Sicily what a man takes from a province when he knows the jury has changed. He calculated the acceptable amount. He operated in the space between what a senatorial jury would allow and what an equestrian jury would not. He was wrong about the space. The jury convicted him. He went into exile with the art he had, stripped from temples and private houses. His defender was Hortensius, the best legal speaker of the generation. His prosecutor was Cicero, born in Arpinum. He knew what a province looked like when someone treated it as personal revenue. The jury convicted. Gaius did not see it. He had designed for time. A different structure produces different outcomes. Not immediately. Over time. The stonecutter who cuts the letters deep enough for rain and for children's hands does not see the children. He specifies the depth. The letters last. The children find them later. He had known this when he wrote the law. He went back to the list. He wrote a clean copy. One column for name. One for province. One for verdict. No summaries. No analysis. The facts in columns. He would not present it in the Senate. He would leave it in the committee room where anyone who wanted to consult it could consult it. He would not draw attention to the fact that it was there. He would simply not remove it. The list would do its own work. He filed it under the third set of documents in the case. He went on to the next calculation. Chapter 4. The Italian Question. Rome had allies. This was the correct term. Socii. Allied cities and peoples who had treaties with Rome. They provided soldiers. They provided grain. They provided the roads and ports that the legions moved. In the last war with Carthage, the Italian allies had provided more than half the army that defeated Hannibal. They had fought the same battles. They had received different things after. A Roman soldier after the grain law had his equipment paid for by the state. He had access to the grain depots. He had access to the jury courts. He had rights under law that a legal process could enforce. An Italian ally who had fought the same war had none of these. He was not a citizen. He did not vote. He did not have access to the distributions. He was subject to Roman magistrates in the field. He had no legal recourse when those orders were abusive. The difference was one word: citizen. Gaius proposed extending Latin rights to the Italian allies. Not full citizenship. Not immediately. Latin rights, the intermediate status that gave men certain legal protections and a path toward the full franchise. He had designed this carefully. Not because he thought partial rights were sufficient. Because partial rights were what he could pass. The Senate reacted faster than it had reacted to anything else he had proposed. The grain law had concerned them. The jury reform had alarmed them. The Italian proposal produced something that was neither concern nor alarm. It produced the specific opposition of men who have identified the proposal that they cannot allow regardless of argument. He had known this would happen. He had known it since he wrote the proposal. The Italian question was the question Rome had been not answering for 60 years. It was not that the Senate disagreed with the argument for Italian rights. Several senators had private views that the argument was sound. They did not say this publicly. They did not say it because the conclusion of the argument was a change in who counted, a change in who voted, a change in who the magistrates were accountable to when they acted in Italy. The Senate had managed what it managed because the count of people it was accountable to was a specific number. The Italian proposal changed that number. This was not about justice. Justice is a reason to change the count. The count determines the power. Those are two different things in the same conversation. Gaius brought 3 Italian men to the committee session. He had met them on a trip through Capua and Cumae in the autumn. He had walked their towns with a measuring rod and an engineer, the same way he walked the road routes. He had eaten in their houses. He had sat with them in the evenings and heard what a treaty looks like from inside it. The first man was a leather worker in Capua. His grandfather had fought in the Second Punic War. He could name the battle. He had the name on a tablet in his house. His grandfather's Name had never been on a Roman voter roll. The second man was a grain merchant from Cumae. He moved grain on the same roads Gaius had built. He paid the same rates as Roman merchants. He did not have the same legal protections. When a Roman official contested the rate, the third man was a veteran from Nola. He had served in Spain. He had the scar on his left arm from a Celtiberian engagement near Numantia. He showed it to the committee. He did not speak Latin well enough to explain it in Latin, so Gaius translated. The committee listened. Some took notes. One senator made a remark about the procedure. The procedure was unusual. This was the point. The usual procedure was a committee of senators deciding what Italian allies needed without Italian allies in the room. The law failed in committee. He had expected this. He had not expected to pass the Italian bill in the first year. He had not expected to pass it at all in his tenure. He had introduced it because the argument had to be made. A thing that is not said is not in the record. A thing in the record can be returned to. The man who says it first does not always live to see it passed. He had known this since Sardinia. He had known it since he read his brother's papers. He walked home from the committee session in the dark. He counted 3 exits from the forum. He counted them without meaning to. It made himself stop. He thought about the veteran from Nola, the scar, the name of the battle he could not say in Latin, the grandfather's name, on a tablet in a house in Capua. He thought, it will be said again. Not by me. By someone else. Probably not soon. He went home. He sat at his desk. He wrote a note about the 3 men and the committee session. He wrote the leather workers' name and the merchant's name and the veteran's name. He folded it and put it in the document case. He was not sure why. He did the same kind of thing his mother did. You write a name so the name continues somewhere other than your memory. Memories are unreliable. Documents are less so. He picked up the next document. The roads needed another calculation. Chapter 5. What Drusus understood. Drusus understood something Gaius did not. This is not an insult to Gaius. Gaius understood many things. Drusus could not. The grain calculation. The road spacing. The way a distribution system fails at its weakest point if the weakest point is not in the plan. These required sitting with numbers until the numbers became a picture. The picture became a blueprint. The blueprint became a road. Drusus could not do this. He did not need to. What Drusus understood was the crowd. Not the crowd as a problem to solve. The crowd as a thing that could be moved without solving it. You do not need to fix a problem to move the people who have it. You need to locate the feeling the problem produces. You need to name it back to them warmly and then gesture at a larger version of what they want. This is a skill, not a small one. He had been watching Gaius for a year before the Senate found him. He had not been watching maliciously. He had been watching the way you watch a man you are curious about. Gaius was curious. He moved in a way no other tribune moved. He turned his back on the Senate and faced the crowd and spoke without notes and walked while he spoke. He checked things himself that he could have assigned to clerks. He was in the forum before the crowd arrived and after it left. Drusus found this both admirable and useful. Admirable because the work was real. The grain law worked. The roads were there. He could walk on them and they were stone and they went where they were supposed to go. A man who said he would build roads and built roads was doing something Drusus genuinely respected in the abstract. Useful because a man who is doing real work cannot simultaneously be doing politics. Gaius was doing real work. Drusus was going to do politics. He went to the Senate and said, I understand what Gracchus is trying to do. I think he is thinking too small. The Senate listened. He laid out his proposals. 12 colonies instead of 1. More land. More distributions. He did not use the word replace. He said, continue the work. Extend it. Give the people more than one man's vision can hold. The Senate listened. They were not going to build 12 colonies. They were deciding how to respond to the man proposing them. They decided to support him. Not because they believed in 12 colonies. Nobody in the room believed in 12 colonies. The room contained men who had been doing arithmetic with land and people and power for their entire careers. 12 colonies was not an arithmetic problem. It was a gesture made of numbers. A gesture can do the work of a plan without being a plan. This is the interesting thing about gestures. They move people. They fill space. In the forum's attention, a man who gestures at 12 colonies while another builds one has made a 12-to-1 argument. The crowd does not always count. The crowd compares. 1 versus 12. The number Drusus was proposing was larger. He stood in the forum on the third day and thanked Gaius. He meant this. He decided gratitude was the correct opening. It was true. It would disarm the crowd's instinct to choose. You do not need the crowd to choose between you. You need the crowd to think, here are two men on the same side. One of them offers more. The crowd thought this. Drusus watched it happen. He was good at watching crowds. He had a specific way of being still while watching. He did not move much when he spoke. He let the words carry. He had learned early that stillness communicates certainty. A man who walks while he speaks is still working something out. A man who stands still has already worked it out and is telling you. He was not certain about 12 colonies. He was certain about something else. He was certain of 3 things. The Senate needed Gaius contained. He was the right person. The job required appearing to agree while doing the opposite. He did not find this dishonest. He found it necessary. This was the important distinction for him. He had made this distinction early. Perhaps too early to know when he had made it. The distinction between dishonesty and necessity is not always visible from the inside. This is a feature, not a defect. Man who saw the full dishonesty of what he was doing would do it less well. Partial clarity is more useful. Drusus was very clear about some things. He was not clear about others. He had arranged this carefully. He went home that evening and wrote a note for his own file. He wrote, the key is not to oppose him. The key is to make his proposals seem like the beginning of something, not the thing itself. Once they are the beginning, the question becomes who completes it. He folded the note. He put it in the back of the document case. He did not look at it again. He did not need to. He had already understood it. You write a thing down to be sure you have understood it. Once it is written, it is understood. The document is for the record, not for the understanding. The understanding lives in what you do after. He went to bed. He slept well. He had always slept well. This was one of the things that made him good at what he did. A man who cannot sleep has not settled the question of whether he is right. A man who sleeps has settled. Not through certainty, through commitment. You commit to the position and you go to bed and the position holds you until morning. He woke up. He went back to the forum. He thanked Gaius again. Chapter 6, Cornelia's Letter, Misenum, November. She wrote the letter at the desk that faced the window. This was always the desk she used. It was not the best desk in the house. The light was not optimal at midday. She had had 20 years to choose another desk and had not. The window was the reason, not the light. The sea. She could look up from the tablet and see the water. The water was still doing what it was doing. This was useful information when you were in the middle of a sentence that was not cooperating. She picked up the stylus. She had written many letters to Gaius. More than she had written to Tiberius in the same period, though she could not have explained why exactly. Something in Gaius required more letters, or invited them. He responded to her letters with letters that contained information. What the roads were doing. What the depots produced. In the first month, he was specific. Tiberius had been specific about the land. Gaius was specific about the systems. She was not sure which he preferred. She was not sure preference was the right category. She began with the garden. The roses that had been dying in September and had not died. After all, the new herb she had planted along the south wall. The quality of the light this November, which was different from last November. She had been noting the light for years. She kept the notes in a small tablet by the window. The notes were not for anyone. They were for her. A record of the season, as it actually was, rather than the general idea of a season. She wrote about the garden for half a page. Then she stopped. She sat for a moment. She looked at the water. The water was doing what it did in November. A specific movement. Shorter waves. The color changed in November. She had written this down in the small tablet. She went back to the letter. She did not write, "I am worried." She had never written this in a letter to either of her sons. She had decided this early. Worry stated directly is not useful to a person in a difficult position. It adds a weight to what they are already carrying. A mother's worry, stated explicitly, requires a response. The response takes the son's attention. The son's attention has better work to do. She found other ways. She had written 2 months ago, "Your brother thought he knew enough." She had sat with that sentence for 3 days before sending it. It was the most direct thing she had sent him. She was not sure. It was the right amount of direct. She had sent it because 3 days was long enough to decide, and she had not found a better sentence. He had read it. He had written back about the depots. This told her something. She did not know exactly what. She was still deciding. Now she wrote about the season. She wrote, "The grain moves well this month. The merchants along the coast have less to say about the price than they did in spring. I take this as a good sign, though the merchants' silence is not always the same thing as agreement." She wrote, "A man came from Rome last week. He had heard you speak in October. He said you had moved very little in that speech. I told him you moved when you were working something out and went still when you had it. He found this interesting. I think it is accurate." She wrote, "I have been reading your father's letters again. Not from when you were young. From before. When he was first in Spain. Everything was still possible. The way it is before. A campaign finds its limits." He wrote about the distances. How Spain goes further than you expect. He always wrote about distances. She sat with her pen above the tablet. She did not write what she was thinking. What she was thinking was, "You are going to Africa soon, and I do not trust the project. Not because Africa cannot hold a colony. Because Africa is far. Because when you are far, the news from Rome arrives old and the decisions in Rome are made without you." She did not write this. She had written it in her own small tablet, the one by the window, the one with the light records. She had written it there so she could see it and decide. She had decided it was hers to know and not his to carry. She ended the letter with what she had seen that morning. The light off the water at the 6th hour. The angle was low. The sea was flat. The color it made on the white wall of the garden. Her hands on the tablet. The pen. The sentence that would not come right until she changed one word. She wrote, "I changed multa to satis." The sentence held after that. This was the whole thing. Not advice. Not warning. Not the weight of a mother watching from a distance. A sentence that had not held and then did. One word. She thought he would understand. This. She thought he would understand. He was the kind of person who changed things by a fraction and checked. He was his mother's son in this more than in other things she could name. She folded the letter. She handed it to the man who would carry it north. She went back to the small tablet. She wrote the like description. Again. She was not sure she had it right the first time. It wanted to get it right. She wrote it twice. The second time was better. She went inside. Chapter 7. Why Carthage Was a Mistake. He understood the plan before he had finished designing it. The Junonia colony was the right idea. This was true. 6,000 families on productive African land. The soil was workable. It had the soil test. The grain grew in the test row. The perimeter calculations held. The colony would function if it was built. This was not the problem. The problem was the location. The Senate had spent years making the destruction of Carthage into a symbol, not just a military victory. A symbol of what Rome was willing to do to something it had decided to remove. from the world. Cato the Elder had said Carthago at the end of every speech for the last 3 years of his life. Regardless of subject, Carthage must be destroyed. He had said this in speeches about the grain price. He had said it in speeches about the roads. He had said it in the Senate when the subject under discussion was the building of a portico. Carthage was not destroyed yet when he started saying it. Eventually it was. The city was burned in 146. The ground was cleared. Rome took the name of the thing it had destroyed and turned it into the symbol of its own will. Building a colony on that ground was not a practical decision. It was a practical decision inside a symbolic argument. The Senate called the site cursed. He had expected this. He had prepared for it. He had the soil. He had the hydrological survey. He had the evidence that the cursed ground grew grain. He presented these to the committee in the expected order. The committee was not persuaded. This was not because the evidence was wrong. The evidence was correct. The committee understood this. The problem was that the committee was not making a decision about soil chemistry. They were deciding whether Rome would revisit the site of its most symbolic act, whether it would plant families there and call it a fresh start. The soil test did not address the symbolic act. He had not designed the soil tests to address the symbolic act. He had designed them to address the soil. This was the gap. He understood this gap clearly in retrospect. He had understood it less clearly in the planning phase. He had thought, evidence addresses objections. Evidence addresses some objections, not the ones that are not about evidence. Drusus used the cursed ground argument. He used it exactly once in a public session carefully. He did not call it cursed. He said, there are questions about the historical significance of this site. Questions that deserve more study before we commit 6,000 families. Historical significance was not a category Gaius had prepared for. He had prepared for soil chemistry, for logistics, for shipping routes, for the grain yield per unit area, using Sicilian rates applied to the test row results. He had not prepared for historical significance. It is not possible to counter historical significance with a soil test. A soil test tells you what the soil will do. Historical significance is what the Senate will do. The debate continued into winter. He spent the autumn in Africa anyway. He went because the work was there and the work needed doing and the colony might still be approved. He had not given up on the approval. He had revised his estimate of the probability downward. He continued the work, because stopping the work on a revised probability estimate was not how he operated. He measured the eastern boundary. He corrected the western marker by 3 feet. He showed the young man from Capua how to find the angle without the instrument, then check it with the instrument after. He ate in the tent. He read the reports from Rome by a smoking lamp. He wrote his responses before dawn. He was doing 3 things at once: the survey, the politics, the ongoing calculation of what was salvageable. This was how he had always worked. 3 things at once each. At the appropriate priority, none of them stopped because one of them was difficult. Africa was not a mistake exactly. It was a mistake in one specific way. He had underestimated the symbolic weight of the site. He had treated a symbol as a practical problem. Symbols are not impractical. They are practical in a different register. He did not stop working on Africa. He started working on the symbol at the same time. He was not sure he had time for both. He was not going to find out until he ran out of time. The colony was never fully established. After his death, the Senate voted to abandon the Junonia project. They cited the cursed ground. They cited historical significance. They did not cite the soil tests. They did not cite the logistics plan. They did not cite the grain yield projections. The work was correct. The ground was workable. The families who would have farmed it would have found it farmable. A thing can be correct and still fail. He knew this going in. He had always known this. He had tried to build around it. He had built enough things correctly that the knowledge of correctly built things was part of the record. The record was different from the buildings. The buildings could be torn down. The record was harder. The soil tests were in a document somewhere. The document survived him by about 200 years. Chapter 8. How he spoke. He had a flute player. Not for music. The flute player stood behind him on the rostra and played a single note when Gaius's voice went too high. This requires explanation. When a speaker is angry, his voice climbs. He does not know. It is climbing. He knows he is angry. He knows his argument is right. He knows the people in front of him need to understand. The voice climbs because anger climbs. The listener hears the climb. The listener hears a man who has lost his own center. A climbed voice is an argument that has overtaken the speaker. The note from the flute told him, "You have climbed." He would hear the note. He would hear it and bring his voice down. Not stop. Not apologize. Come down. The way you come down. From a ridge to a road. You do not apologize for the ridge. You return to the road because the road is where the argument travels. He had used the flute player since his second year in the forum. He had told almost nobody about it. He told the flute player. One note when the voice goes up. The flute player said, "How? Well, I know when up is too much." He said, "You will know." The flute player knew. He moved when he spoke. This was the thing people noticed first. Speakers stood in one place. They had always stood in one place. The platform had a center and you stood in the center, and the center was where authority was. The crowd expected the center. Tribunals, magistrates, consuls, all of them in the center. He walked the full length of the rostra. He gestured at the columns. He gestured at the crowd nearest him and then at the crowd furthest back. He turned. He changed direction mid-sentence and kept the sentence in place. This required keeping the voice forward even as the body turned. He had worked on this in private for a long time. A sentence does not stay in place on its own. You have to hold it. He had learned this from watching. He had watched bad speakers lose a sentence mid-turn. The sentence went where the body went. The crowd went somewhere else. He had practiced the sentence staying. His voice was not the loudest in the forum. It was the clearest. The ends of his sentences arrived. This was not common. Most speakers let the ends fall. The energy that carried the beginning was not always there for the end. He had trained himself to keep the energy not louder at the same, even all the way to the period. He spoke about one thing at a time. This sounds simple. It is not. A man with large plans has many things to say. The temptation is to say them at once, to use the connection between them as an argument. Look how this connects to that. Look how they support each other. He had learned in Sardinia that a crowd can hold one thing at a time, not because they are simple. One crowd, one ear at a time. The ear holds one thing well or several things partially. He gave them one thing. He gave it completely. He gave them the beginning and the middle, and the end of it. He gave them the problem and the solution, and the connection between those two specific things. He did not give them the connection to the next problem until the first was complete. Then he stopped. Then he started the next one. He had given a 2-hour speech on his first morning and covered for separate things. He had given them in 4 parts. Part complete. Each part ending before the next began. The crowd had held all 4 because he had given them one at a time. The thing he did that other speakers did not do. He told them what he was going to say before he said it. Not an announcement. Not, "I am now going to speak about the grain." A sentence that named the problem. Made the crowd understand something that mattered was coming. You watched this land. The moment the crowd understood the sentence was about them, there was a physical change in the square. The leaning forward. The stillness. Not silence. The other thing. When a room goes from noise to a specific kind of attention, the attention has a sound. It is almost nothing. Almost silence. He knew how to produce it. He aimed at it the way an archer aims. He had felt it on the first morning. He had felt it many times. Since he had never gotten used to it. He was not sure he wanted to get used to it. Getting used to something means it is no longer new information. The stillness of a crowd that is listening is information. Tells you, this is landing. This is the word that matters. This is the place in the argument where the thing becomes real to them and not just an argument. He needed to know where that was. Every time. In each speech. He kept feeling it as new. He thought about his brothers speaking. Tiberius had been a careful speaker. He stood in one place. He used notes. His voice was precise and even. He argued well. And the argument was correct and the crowd had been with him. Tiberius had not moved. This was not a flaw. It was a choice. Some arguments do not require movement. Tiberius had a specific kind of argument. It came from sitting with numbers and knowing the numbers were right and presenting the numbers clearly. The clarity came from stillness. The numbers did not need gestures. Gaius had a different kind of argument. His argument required the crowd to feel what the numbers meant. The carpenter who sold the tools. The woman with the bread. The old man at the grain depot with the bag on his shoulder. These were not numbers. They were people inside the numbers. Making them real required movement. Required the whole body. To say, this happened to a person. He had understood this difference for years. He moved. The flute player sat behind him and watched for the climb. Chapter 9. What Drusus Did. Drusus introduced his laws in pairs. This was the structure. Each of his proposals came with a twin. He proposed land for the poor and then proposed removing the rent from existing allotments. He proposed the 12 colonies, and then proposed making the grain distributions even larger. He proposed giving Latin allies certain rights and then proposed giving them something more generous than what Gaius had proposed. Each pair did the same thing. It took the ground Gaius had staked out and extended it one step further. You cannot argue against extension. You can argue against a thing. You cannot argue against more of a thing you have already said is good. When a man says, I want land reform, and another says, yes and more, the first man cannot say, not that much. He has defined himself as the man who wants less, even if his less is more real than the other man's more. This was the geometry. Drusus had worked it out before he went to the forum. He had sat with a tablet and drawn the positions. The original position. The extended position. The space between them where the argument would have to live. He had drawn it until he understood the shape of the thing and then he had gone to the forum. The 12 colonies were the clearest example. Gaius had spent 2 years designing the Junonia colony. He had tested the soil. He had done the hydrological survey. He had walked the perimeter 4 times. He had the grain yield calculations. He had the family capacity numbers. He had the shipping route. Drusus proposed 12 colonies. He proposed them in a speech of about 40 minutes. He did not have soil tests for the 12 locations. He did not have surveys. He did not have yield calculations. He had 12 names and 12 locations. He had the warmth of a man offering something because he decided to, not because he had done the arithmetic. The crowd heard 1 versus 12. The Senate heard what it needed to hear, which was not 12 colonies, which was, this man is doing what we asked him to do. The crowd is confused about which tribune is on their side. Confusion is enough. We do not need them to choose against Gracchus. We need them to stop choosing for him with the specific force they chose before. Confusion is a product. Drusus had manufactured it correctly. He did one other thing. He used the Italian proposal. Gaius had proposed Latin rights for the Italian allies. The Senate had blocked this in committee. Drusus proposed full citizenship for the Latins and Latin rights for the rest. Larger offer from the same space. The Senate had no intention of passing this either. Drusus knew this. The Senate knew Drusus knew this. The proposal was not a proposal. It was a move in a positional argument. The Latins in the crowd heard, Drusus is offering more. The citizens in the crowd heard, Drusus is offering to dilute their citizenship. Drusus had made an offer that appealed to 2 groups and alarmed a third. The citizen base of Rome itself. The citizen base of Rome was precisely the group that Gaius needed most. A man who comes to your voters with an offer that worries them about you has moved without moving. Gaius walked home one evening in November. He understood exactly what had happened. He could not find a place to stand where the damage was reversible. He went to the forum the next morning and gave a speech about the Italian allies. It was a good speech. He gave them the leather worker and the grain merchant and the veteran and the scar. He gave them the name of the battle the veteran could not say in Latin. He gave them the grandfather's name on the tablet in the house in Capua. The crowd listened. Some of them were with him. He could feel it. The particular attention of a crowd that has understood the argument and is holding it. Some of them were worried. He could feel that too. The worry had a specific texture. Not hostile. Not opposed to him. Something more difficult. A worried crowd needs a reason to go with the worry, even when it is otherwise sympathetic. Drusus had given them a reason. He could not ungive it. He gave the speech. The speech was good. He did not move the number by much. He understood what this meant. He had one more year. He needed to use it differently than he had used the first. He went back to the desk. He went back to the documents. He went back to the calculations. The roads were still there. The grain law was still running. The courts had equestrian juries. He had built things. The things were real. He turned to the next problem. He always turned to the next problem. This was the thing about him. The turning. He could not stay. In the loss. He acknowledged it and then he turned. Not because he was indifferent to loss. Because the turning was the only option he had ever found that kept the work moving. He turned. Chapter 10. The Second Term. December. BC 122. The city feels different in winter. This is not metaphor. Stone holds cold the way it holds heat. Past the cause of it. The forum before dawn in December smells of iron and the river and last night's torch smoke. The breath of the early crowd hangs in the air. Small clouds. People do not talk loudly in December mornings. They hold the warmth they came out with and move quickly toward the thing they need. He noticed the cold the way he noticed exits. Not always, consciously. As information the body keeps. He had been in this forum for 1 year. He knew which stones were slick on cold mornings and which held grip. He knew where the smoke from the temple fires pooled when the wind was from the south. He knew the early men, the ones who arrived before, the merchants, the ones who were there for reasons that required early arrival. He knew their routes now. He knew which ones had changed their routes in November. The change was small. Not a disappearance. A shift. Some of the regular faces had begun to arrive later. Not gone. Later. This was information. The man who came before dawn for a year. Now he comes at the second hour. He has decided something. He has not decided against you. He has decided to wait. Waiting is a position. It is not the same position as being with you. He had been tracking this since October. He had his own document. Not a report. A record in a small tablet. Date. Approximate number. Notable absences or additions. Not everyone. A sample. The early arrivals. He had been using them as a measure. The people who chose early were people who had chosen. The sample had always been with him. In November the sample shifted. By December the shift had settled into a pattern. Still with him. Less early. Less certain. More willing to wait and see. He understood what this meant. He had understood it while it was happening. He had not been able to stop it from happening. There was a woman who sold bread at the edge of the forum. She had been there since before he started in the tribunate. She was there before dawn with the loaves and the small brazier. And the cup. She knew who came early and who came late. She had been watching the forum longer than most people in it. He stopped at her stall one morning in December. He bought bread. He said her name. She looked at him the way she looked at everyone, which was directly without particular warmth or its absence. She was not unfriendly. She was not in the business of friendship at the 4th hour of the morning. He said, "How is the trade this week?" She said, "Like November." He said, "Is that better or worse than October?" She said, "Neither. Different." He thought about this. He thanked her. He used her name. He walked on. Different. Not the word you wanted. Not the word that told you. The number. Different meant the shape had changed. The question was which shape it had changed into. He did not know yet. He would know by spring. He filed for the second tribunate in December. The process was the same. He had done it before. He knew the rooms. He knew the clerks. He knew the form and where to take the form and what happened after. Familiarity does not make a process easier exactly. It makes it faster. You do not spend the time that a first time requires figuring out where to stand. He had the numbers when he filed. Not final. Estimated. He had been calculating since October. He had the Subura numbers. The Aventine numbers. The numbers from the area below the Esquiline. He had the shifts. The sample from the early arrivals. His estimate was that he would win. Not by the margin of the first year. By a smaller margin. He was right. He won. He had known he would win. He had also known what winning by a smaller margin meant. The Senate knew what it meant. Drusus knew what it meant. Everyone who counted things knew what it meant. He had won. He had one more year. The margin was the message. BC 121. January. He stands in the forum on the first morning of his second year. It is cold. The torches are burning the same way. The stones are the same. He knows the exits. He knows which stones are slick. He knows the bread woman at the edge. He knows what the early arrivals looked like in October versus December. He turns right. He faces the crowd. He opens his mouth. He gives them the next problem. The next piece of the system. He has been building. Not review. Not what he accomplished. The next thing. He always turns to the next thing. The crowd listens. The crowd is smaller than it was on the first morning. He can feel this without counting. He has always been able to feel numbers before he counts them. An estimate. A sense of the shape of a quantity. He speaks clearly. The ends of sentences arrive. The flute player sits behind him. The note does not come. He speaks for 2 hours. When he finishes, some people stay. Some leave. Last year more people stayed. He notes this. He files it. He goes to work. Chapter 11. Cornelia Watches. Misenum. January. BC 121. The reports from Rome arrive on the third day of the month. She has a system for receiving them. The man who brings the reports comes to the back of the house. The garden side, not the sea road. She built this habit. Early. A report that arrives at the front of the house arrives publicly. Reports should arrive privately. You read them and decide what they mean before they are anyone else's information. She reads them at the desk. In the afternoon when the light is flat and she is not likely to be interrupted. She reads slowly. She is not a slow reader. She is a deliberate one. The difference is where the reading happens. A fast reader takes the surface. A deliberate reader waits for the thing the surface is sitting on. The report for January said, Gaius has won a second term. The margin was smaller than the first year. She had expected a smaller margin. She had been expecting it since autumn. She had been receiving reports since October and the shape of the reports had been changing. Not the facts, the texture of the facts. The same forum. The same men. A slightly different distribution of how they were moving through it. She recognized this texture. She had learned to read political texture from her husband. He had not taught it directly. He talked about his campaigns in the evenings. She listened. She asked specific questions. He answered. She continued. This had gone on for 30 years. Her husband was gone. She had the habit he had given her. She continued. She wrote the margin down in her small tablet. Not the January report. The small tablet by the window. The one with the light records and the private notes. She wrote the margin and the date and a small mark she used for things that required attention. Not alarm. Attention. Then she wrote, Drusus. She had been watching Drusus since the summer reports. She had written his name in the small tablet in August. She had written it twice. Once when he proposed 12 colonies. Once when she understood the structure of the proposal. She had spent 2 years watching Tiberius's opposition. The opposition to Tiberius had been direct, loud, clear in its hostility. She had known what it was. She had tried to name it. He had understood. He had gone forward anyway. The argument was correct. Drusus was not the same kind of opposition. Drusus did not oppose. He agreed. He extended. He offered more. Of the same thing in the same direction with more warmth. She had written in August. This is the harder kind. She looked at the entry from August. She read it. She had been right in August. She was still right in January. She did not find being right useful exactly. You cannot use being right about a thing you cannot change. You can know the thing. You can hold the knowing carefully and continue. She wrote a letter. She had been writing letters to Gaius since January of the year before. She wrote them in the evening after the reports. She kept the letters in 2 piles. The ones she sent and the ones she did not send. The unsent ones were longer, more direct. They contained the things she had decided not to give him to carry. This letter went in the sent pile. She wrote about the sea, the roses that had not died in September. She wrote about a visitor who had come from Rome and described a speech Gaius gave in December. She wrote that the visitor had said, "He moves less than he used to." She wrote, "I told the visitor that this was probably not right. You move less. When you have found something out, you do not need to move as much. The movement is a kind of searching. When you have the answer, you go still." She was not sure this was true. She wrote it anyway. Some letters are written to give something, rather than to say something. She went back to the report. The grain law, still running. The roads, intact. The jury reform, in place. She noted each of these in the tablet beside the margin. Not because she would forget. Because writing things beside each other produces a shape. The shape, the work was still there. The margin was smaller. The work and the margin were in the same period. They would continue to be in the same period. She did not know which would last longer. She thought it would be the work. She did not know this. She thought it. The sea was outside. The sea in January was different from the sea in August. She had the entries for both in the small tablet. The color, the sound, the quality of the light at the 6th hour. She had the comparison. She had read the Africa report in September. He had sailed in late summer. She had known the date. She had not written to ask him to delay. The survey was real work. The colony required it. You do not ask a man to delay real work. Not because of a number in a tablet. Not even when the number concerns you. She had stood at the window on the evening she calculated he would be crossing. 3 days if the wind cooperated. She had the wind records. From a sea captain she consulted for the light entries in the small tablet. The wind in late summer from the south of Italy was usually cooperative. Usually. She had stood at the window until the light was gone. Then she had gone back to the desk. In Misenum the sea does not stop at night. You hear it regardless. She had stopped noticing it in the first year. She had started noticing it again in October when the reports changed texture. The sea at the back of everything. The same water he was crossing. She had not written this in the small tablet. Some things do not belong in a record. She looked at the water for a moment. She put the small tablet beside the lamp. A good report. She went back to the next report. Chapter 12, The Evening Before Africa. The evening before he sailed. His desk was clear for the first time in 2 years. He had taken everything off it. Not because he was done. Because he was going and the documents needed to be in the right hands. Before he left, he had spent the afternoon moving documents. The Grain Commission records to the 3 equestrian administrators. He trusted the Road Commission accounts to the man who had been his second since the first year. The court reform dossier to a senator who had voted correctly on every related measure. He would need the specifics if there was a challenge. 4 hours. He had done it carefully. Each document to the right person. With a note. He did not rush the notes. You cannot rush a note that someone else will use in your absence. The note is not for you. It is for the person who will read it when you are not there to explain. The desk was clear. He sat at it anyway. The lamp made a small sound, the oil finding its level. He had not replaced it today. It would last another hour. He sat in the small remaining hour. He had been to Africa twice. The first time to begin the survey. The second time to continue. Now a third. He knew what the crossing felt like. 3 days, if the wind cooperated. 5 if it did not. The smell of the ship in the first hour out. The way the Italian coast disappeared. Before the African one appeared. The particular light over Carthage in the morning, flat and bright, nothing like Rome. He had a list for the third trip. Not a document. A list in his head. The eastern boundary. Correction. The depot spacing for the second phase. A conversation with the survey crew about the angle measurement procedure he had worked out on the last trip. The young man from Capua. His angles were correct now. He had been wrong in October and he had corrected himself before Gaius said anything. That kind of correction is the one you can trust. He went through the list. It was the right length. Too short meant he was missing something. Too long meant he had not prioritized. The length was right. The work in Carthage was specific and completable. He would go. He would do it. He would come back. He tried to hold that sequence. He could hold 2 of the 3. The problem was the 3rd month. He had run the calculation twice. He was honest with himself. About calculations. You do not adjust a number because the answer is inconvenient. The number is the number. You plan around the number. The number said, while he was gone, Drusus would have 3 months. He did not think Drusus was stupid. This was the part he had to be careful about. It was easy to think of Drusus as the Senate's instrument and nothing more. An instrument was a simple thing. A man who understood the geometry of positioning was not simple. Drusus had sat with a tablet and drawn the positions the way Gaius drew systems. Original to opposite. Space between. He had identified the leverage points without being told where they were. 3 months was enough to shift the center. Not move it. Not take it all the way to the other side. Shift. From outside the square it looked the same. From inside it, the floor was different. He had seen it already. November. Walking home and understanding that he had no place to stand where the damage reversed. He was going to Africa anyway. He told himself, the survey was real work that had to be done. This was true. The eastern boundary correction was not a reason to stay in Rome. The colony would fail without the survey and the colony was the work. You do not abandon the work because someone else is working against it. He believed this. He also knew what 3 months was. Both things were true. He had learned to hold 2 true things that ran in opposite directions. You do not choose between them. You hold them together and move. He was going to Africa. He walked the house before sleeping. Not checking. He had checked everything he needed to check. Walking. The way he walked the forum in the early hours. Not inspection. Presence. You move through a space before leaving. Because the moving is a kind of knowing. I was here. I walked this. The kitchen. The cold hearth. The lamp that would burn another 30 minutes. The courtyard where the afternoon light had fallen on the left wall and told him the day was half gone. He had watched that light every day for 2 years. Hit the same place in the same season. The courtyard did not change. He was the one going. He stood in the courtyard. The night sounds of Rome. Carts on stone further away. The river somewhere beyond the rooftops. A dog on the Aventine. He had memorized these sounds without meaning to. You memorize a city by living in it. You do not choose what you memorize. He thought about the bread woman at the edge of the forum. She had said, different. Not better. Not worse. Different. He had thought about that. Word for 2 months. Different is what a forum feels like when the center of gravity has shifted slightly. You can only feel it from inside. From outside the stone is the same stone. Same columns. The same steps. The same crowd at the 7th hour. From inside the square, different. He was going to Africa. He would come back to a forum that had had 3 more months of Drusus. He knew what that meant. He went inside. The 3,000 names were in the document case. He had not moved that case. He had moved everything else. The grain records, the road accounts, the court dossier, the colony, survey notes. He had moved all of it to the right desks. It had left the document case. It had the names. The leather worker from Capua. The grain merchant from Cumae. The veteran from Nola. The grandfathers. Name on the tablet. The names of those who had given him a season of attention. Their presence in a committee room. Their weight. He had written them because you write a name so the name continues somewhere other than your memory. He had not moved the case. He did not know if this was a decision or not. He sat at the empty desk. Outside, the Subura made its slow night sounds. Iron on stone. The creak of something wooden under weight. The river below the hills and the hills below the dark. He thought about the road south of Rome. The milestone markers. In the dark, along the verge, standing straight. He had checked them in November. Correct. He had expected them to be correct. And check them anyway. You design it correctly and then you check it. The checking is not doubt. The checking is the second half of design. He thought, the work is in the right places. The grain. The roads. The courts. 3 of the 4 things he had set out to build. 3 of 4 running. The 4th facing an opposition that numbers could not address. 3 of 4. He held this. Then the work is in the right places. That was as much as he could do before going. He lay down. The lamp went out while he lay there. He did not get up to replace it. He knew the room in the dark. He had learned it. Over 2 years of early mornings and late returns. The position of the desk. The window. The particular quality of silence that was Rome at the 3rd hour. He thought about the survey crew in Carthage. The young man from Capua. The eastern boundary. The angle measurement. Procedure. Specific. Completable. He would arrive and the work would be there. Concrete. Measurable. Either right or wrong. The kind of work that gave you a clean answer. He thought about the forum. He let that thought pass. He thought about the road south. The milestone markers standing. Straight in the dark. Correct. 3% under budget. 7 of 9 routes complete. He thought the structure holds. He went to sleep. He did not sleep well. He slept enough. In the morning, Africa. Chapter 13, January again. BC 121. January. He is in the forum before dawn again. The second time around, you know different things. He knows the sound the square makes before anyone arrives. The cold air in an empty space used by thousands of people for 100 years. Old stone. Giving back the cold it held all night. The torch at the rostra. Corner that always burns slightly lower than the others. The cart traffic from the Velabrum. 3 streets away. Starts at the 4th hour. Runs until midday. He knows these things the way a soldier knows a camp after the second winter. Not because he studied them. Because he was there. And they went in. He walks the square. He thinks about the margin. He has been thinking about the margin since the election. Not with regret. With the specific attention he gives to data that has changed. A changed number is information. You do not regret information. You use it. The margin was smaller. The crowd was smaller on the first morning of the second year. The bread woman had said, different. He had been tracking the shift in the early arrivals since October. The shift was real. It was not gone. It had not reversed. Had settled at a level lower than the first year. He had the numbers. This meant he had 1 year with a changed base. The laws were still there. The system was still running. The base from which he operated had contracted by a measurable amount. He needed to know what that amount meant for what he could still do. He does the calculation in his head as he walks. He walks the way he speaks. Moving helps. When he is still, the calculation slows. When he moves, it runs. He stops at the rostra. He puts his hand on the base. The stone is cold. The same stone he touched in the dark before the first morning, a year ago. He has given 40 speeches from this platform in the past year. He knows the stone. He knows the sight line from the top step to the back of the square. He knows how far his voice carries on a cold morning versus a warm one. He knows where the crowd thins and where it holds. He knows the forum the way a general knows a field he has managed for a year. Not because he was briefed on it, because he operated in it. He takes his hand from the stone. The second year will be harder. He has known this since November. The Senate has a year of watching his system to find the places where it is thinner than it looks. Drusus has had a year of building a second name in the forum. The crowd is not gone. The crowd has other things to consider now. Crowds that have other things to consider are crowds that might be persuaded differently. He knows all of this. He has known all of it since before the election. He thinks about the Italian men, the leather worker, the grain merchant, the veteran from NOLA. Their names are in the document case. He has not shown the document to anyone. He does not know why he kept it. He keeps documents. For the record, these are for something else. He thinks about the veteran's scar. The battle named the veteran could not say in Latin. The grandfather's name on a tablet in a house in Capua. He cannot give them citizenship. Not this year. Maybe not ever. In his time. He had known this going in. The Italian bill had been a statement. A thing put in the record. The next man who stands here and looks at what is wrong will find the statement. He stands in the forum and it is January and it is the first morning of the second year. He turns right. He faces the crowd. The crowd is smaller than last January. He can feel the size without counting. He opens his mouth. He gives them the next problem. He had come back from Africa 10 days ago. The crossing had been 4 days. Wind from the south on the last day. He had stood at the bow and watched Italy appear. The hills first. Then the coastline taking shape. He had been gone 3 months. He had done the work in Carthage. The eastern boundary corrected. The depot spacing finalized. The conversation with the survey crew. The angle measurement procedure that the young man from Capua had gotten right by the second week. All of it done. Of it filed. He had come back with a completed set of documents. The clarity of a man who has done what he went to do. The forum had been different from the dock. He had walked it the first evening. Before anyone expected him. A plain cloak. The late light. He had wanted to feel the square. Before the square felt him arriving. It was different. He had felt different in October. This was further. Drusus had spent 3 months in the forum while Gaius was in Africa. He had the list of what Drusus had proposed. He had read it on the ship. The 12 colonies. The extended grain distribution. The Italian offer that was not an offer. Proposal a position staked further in a direction Gaius had already staked. You cannot argue against more of what you have said is good. He had known this in November. He had seen it clearly. He had gone to Africa anyway because the boundary correction was real. Work that had to be done. He had been right about that. He was not sure what he had been right about beyond that. He stood in the forum in October of his return. He felt the shift. He went home. He did not write a document about it. Some things you carry without filing. You file them in the way the body files things. Weight and direction. The change texture of a crowd that is otherwise the same crowd. He had filed it. Now it was January. The second year. The change base. He had the numbers. He had the forum. He had 9 months. He had done harder calculations with less. He always gives them the next problem. Chapter 14. The lamp at the end of the first year. December. BC 122. This is the evening after the second term win. Last year's evening. He is still in the office when the building empties. He does not notice when the others leave. He notices when the building is quiet. The building has a specific sound when it is full. Footsteps in the corridor. The door at the end. The clerk's chair on stone. When these sounds stop, he notices The building is quiet. He is at his desk. The lamp is burning. The same lamp he uses every evening. He has used this lamp for a year. He knows how. It burns at the end of the oil. The particular color of the light when it is running low. It is running low now. He could send for more oil. He does not. He is looking at the map. It is a map of the city and the road south. He has been working from this map since before January. He drew the depot locations himself in the spring when the positions were still estimates. He had drawn them at the scale that allowed the full distribution network to be visible on one sheet. He can see the network. Not a plan now. A thing that exists. The depots are marked in black. The roads in red. The connections between them in blue. 3 colors. 312,000 families in the first month. 341,000 in October. He looks at the map. He has looked at it many times. He looks at it differently now. Before, he looked at it as a plan to be executed. Now he looks at it as evidence. This happened. This is what it looks like. The lamp is almost out. He knows this by the color. He should stop. He has to be at the forum before dawn. He is always at the forum before dawn. The second year will require it more, not less. He looks at the map for another minute. He thinks about Drusus. Drusus is good. He has thought about this many times and always arrived at the same conclusion. Drusus is good at what he does. He is warm and patient, and he understands the crowd in a specific way. He offers more. He does it without notes and without moving. And the warmth is real. Gaius has watched him. The warmth is not performed. He thinks a man can be good at a thing and wrong about the thing. He has been in this room for a year. He has looked at the map. He has read the reports. The system is running. 3 of 4 parts work. One part is facing a meeting. He is going to try to fix the meeting next year. He does not know if he will fix it. He does not know how the second year will go. He knows what it looked like from here after the first. The lamp goes out. He sits in the dark for a moment. The window is there. The city's torchlight comes through. Faint. Enough to see the desk and the map. The red lines for the roads. The black marks for the depots. He thinks about the bread woman at the edge of the forum. Different. Not better or worse. Different. He has been sitting with that word for 2 months. He has not found a better way to hold it. Different is accurate. The forum has changed. The crowd has changed. The bread woman had watched the forum before he arrived. She was watching it now. She had given him the most accurate word of the year. He picks up the map. He folds it carefully. He has folded it many times. The fold lines are soft from use. He puts it in the document case. He stands. He puts on his cloak. He goes home. In the morning, the forum. The second year. He was ready for it before the first one ended. This is how he has always worked. You finish the day by getting ready for the next one. He walks home in the dark. The city makes its night sounds. In his mind, he is already in January of the second year. He is always already in the next thing. Chapter 15. The Milestone in the Dark. There is a road south of Rome. He measured it himself in April of BC 123. He walked it with a rod and 2 engineers. He moved when he walked the way he moved when he thought. Steady. Not fast. The engineers kept pace. They had learned in the first week not to suggest a different pace. He checked the measurements when they were done. He checked them again. Not because the engineers were careless. The engineers were not careless. He had chosen them because they were not careless. He checked because checking is the second half of design. Design it correctly. Then you confirm the design against the physical thing. The two should match. When they match, 2 things. The design was right and the execution was right. Both separately. Both verified. He had checked every road this way. The road still exists. Some of it. Parts of it. Under other roads and under the fields. And under the towns that grew along the route he had plotted. Stone does not disappear. It descends. It becomes the base of the next thing. The road that is no longer visible as a road becomes the foundation for the road that replaced it. You build on what was there. He had known this about stone before he built anything with it. He had known it as a principle. Then he had walked the routes, and put the principle into the ground and watched it become physical. That conversion was the thing he kept coming back to, not the idea. The moment the idea stopped being an idea, that moment was in April, walking south with a rod. The milestone markers stood along the verge. He checked them in November after the second election. He walked, away from the city. No engineers. No rod. Just the road. And the markers in the late afternoon light going horizontal. Across the verge. He stopped at each marker and checked the facing. They were all correct. He had expected this. He checked anyway. A man who stops, checking after a while, is not confident. He is tired. Confidence and fatigue feel similar from the inside. You can tell them apart by whether you still check. He still checked. He walked to the fourth marker and stopped. The stone was cold under his hand, cut in the quarry south of the Alban Hills, transported on the road it was eventually going to mark. He had thought about this during the planning. The stone that marks the road travels the road before the road is finished. The marker is the first traveler. He had not put this in any document. Some things you notice and keep. The road south of the city in December. He is not on it. He is at the desk in the city, the lamp burning. Well, he has the next set of calculations in front of him. But the road is there. He had checked it in November. Correct. Markers in the right positions. Stone tight to the earth the way stone is after 1 year of use. Not new. Not old. Settled. The road had accepted being a road. He thinks about the marker under his hand. Cold stone. Correctly placed. The facing straight. The letters cut deep enough that they would be legible for a century. It had specified the depth of cut. You can specify almost anything. That matters. The question is whether you have identified everything that matters. He had thought about the depth of cut for 3 days. He had decided, deep enough that rain cannot soften the edges. Deep enough that a child running her hand across the face of the stone feels the letters without looking. He had specified this. The stonecutter had looked at him for a moment and then written it down. Outside the forum was quiet. The 4th hour. The city between its labors. The grain law is still running. 341,000 recipients in October. The variance holding. The roads connected. The jury reform working. The colony report still open on the desk. 3 of 4. He has gone over this before. He does not need to go over it again. He goes over it again. Not because he does not know the numbers, because the numbers change what they mean depending on how he holds them. 3 of 4 is a failure if you count from the top. 3 of 4 is a system still running if you count from where he started. He has learned to count from where he started. He goes back to the calculation in front of him. South of Rome, the markers stand in a row along the verge. You cannot see them clearly in the dark. They are shapes. But you know where they are. You have walked the road. You have the position of each marker in the plan. You know the spacing. In the dark, you move along the road. You know where the markers are from the plan. The plan is in your head. The markers are in the dark. Both are real. He checks the calculation. It is correct. He goes on to the next one. The lamp holds. Chapter 16. The second year's work. BC 121. Spring. The second year is harder in specific ways he had expected. He had made a list in January. Not a document list. A mental list. The things the second year would require that the first did not. He kept the list current. He added to it and removed from it as the year moved. The first item, the Drusus problem. Not Drusus himself. The structural problem Drusus represented. You have built a system. Someone stands beside the system and offers more. The crowd begins comparing. The crowd that compares is not the crowd that builds. They are the same people. The comparison is what has changed. You cannot argue against comparison. You can only build faster or better or in ways the comparison cannot reach. He had spent January thinking about the third option, building in ways the comparison cannot reach. This required building things that were not promises, things the crowd could not be offered a larger version of. Stone, documents, specific numbers, the grain arriving at the correct price, the road that cut 2 days to one, the jury that convicted when the old jury would not have. These were not promises. Drusus could not promise more of them. In a meaningful way. You cannot promise a road you have not surveyed. You cannot promise a depot you have not counted. He had spent the second year doing more of this. The road commission finished the 9th route in March. He walked it himself on a Tuesday. The route ran from a depot south of the city to a grain town in the hills. The previous connection had been a dirt track that became impassable after rain. 3 times a year on average the track closed. The grain sat in the town. The town paid the cost of the sitting. The stone route did not close. He walked it. He checked the drainage at the low point near the 3rd milestone. The engineers had designed the drainage to handle twice the normal volume. He had asked for twice. He had specified it in the commission document. The drainage was correct. He walked to the town and back. 8 miles each way. He did not count the miles while walking. He counted the milestones. They were in the right places. He came back to the city in the late afternoon. His feet were tired. He did not mention this to anyone. He sat at his desk and wrote the road as complete in the commission record. He ate. He slept. In the morning, the next document. The grain commission was running at a surplus in April. This required explanation. He had designed the distribution system with a specific reserve buffer. 3 months of supply. He had set this number based on Sicilian shipping times and the arrival variance from the first year. 3 months was the number that kept the system from going into shortage before a delayed shipment could be replaced. The reserve had grown beyond 3 months. It was now 4.5 months. This meant the system was taking in more than it was distributing. Not because distribution had slowed, because the import volume had been adjusted based on his projections, and the projections had run slightly high. He had a choice. He could leave the buffer at 4.5 months. More reserve was not a problem. It was protection. Or he could adjust the import volume down to the projected rate. Use the freed capacity to extend distribution to new areas. He chose the extension. He wrote the adjustment in the commission document. He wrote the reasoning. Not for the commission. For the record. Someone would find this document in 10 years. They would want to know why the area changed. He wrote it so they would know. Drusus continued in the forum. He was there most mornings. He had a specific pattern. He arrived after the early crowd had gathered. He was warm before the first sentence. He stood in one place. He spoke for 40 minutes. He thanked people. The crowd responded to him. Gaius watched this from the edge of the colonnade one morning. Not to study it. He had already studied it. He was watching to check his earlier observation. His earlier observation, Drusus, was good at what he did. Not good in the way a man is good at a craft he has developed. Good in the way a man is good at something that comes naturally and has been shaped by long exposure. The warmth was real. He had decided this in October. He confirmed it now. A man with real warmth is harder to argue with than a man with performed warmth. You can argue with performance. You can point at the gap between the warmth and the action. When the warmth is real, the gap is different. The warmth exists. The action is separate from the warmth. The man believes in the warmth, and the action is what the situation requires. Drusus believed in the warmth. The 12 colonies were a different matter. He believed in the warmth. He thought about his brother. He did this less often now than in the first year. Not because he had stopped, because the thinking had reached a point where it did not move anymore. He had thought what he was going to think about his brother. The thoughts were complete. What he thought was this. Tiberius had understood what was wrong. He had understood it. Before anyone else with his access to the forum. He had a solution. That was correct. He had believed that a correct solution clearly stated through the right process would be received correctly. He had been wrong about the last part. Gaius had spent 10 years trying to find the fix for the last part. He had found several. The direction he faced on the rostra. The system that could not be dismantled in one move. The jury reform. The connection between the grain law and the road network. And the colonial plan. Each piece made the others harder to undo. He was not sure he had found them all. He had found more than his brother had. This was not a competition. He had never thought of it as one. He had thought of it as a continuation. One man finds part of the answer. The next man finds more. The part you find is the part the forum allows you to reach in your time. You reach as far as you can. You put it in the record. The record is for the next man. Spring became summer. The grain was moving. The roads were complete. The courts were running. He had not resolved the colony question. He had tried 3 times in committee. He had brought new evidence. Each time. The survey results. The drainage analysis. A letter from the engineer who had done the soil testing confirming the yield projections. The committee had not moved. He had known it would not move. He had brought the evidence. Anyway, you put the evidence in the record. You do this even when the committee will not move on it. The record is not for this committee. He was in Africa in the summer, measuring the eastern boundary, checking the survey work, teaching the young man from Capua how to find the angle. The angles were correct. He went back to Rome. He sat at the desk. He turned to the next document. This was the 2nd year. It was harder in the ways he had expected. It also produced things he had not expected. The road in March. The grain surplus in April. The light in the forum in late summer. The long afternoon on the columns. He had not seen it this way in the first year. He had seen it now. He filed it with the other things he had seen. He went back to work. Chapter 17. The count. He counted. He had always counted. The exits from the forum. 3 if you included the lane by the Temple of Saturn. The milestone markers south of Rome. The days remaining in the 2nd year. The votes needed in committee. The tons of grain in the reserve depot. He counted what he could count. This was not anxiety. It was practice. Anxiety counts and loses. Count and starts again. Practice counts and files the number. He filed numbers. He had been filing numbers since before his first day in the forum. The number he could not file, how much time remained. He had tried to build systems that did not need him to continue. This was the point. A system that requires the person who built. It is not a system. It is a person. He had tried to build beyond the person. He was not sure he had succeeded. He had 9 months left in the tribunate. He was working. The grain was moving. The roads were there. He counted the days. He filed the number. He went back to the desk. He walked the forum one more time in the evenings. Not checking. Not inspection. Moving. This was how he processed the day. The forum absorbed the processing. He had been doing this since January of the first year. He had not planned to. He had simply been in the forum in the evening. After the work was done, he started moving. He found it useful. The forum in the evening was different from the forum at dawn. Dawn, the city arriving. The cold and the torches and the first voices. Energy moving toward the day. Evening, the city settling. The light going flat. The torches coming on. The day's business having been transacted. The merchants gone. The lawyers gone. The tribunes gone. Just the square and the stones and the few people crossing through on their way to somewhere else. He walked it in the evening and filed the day. Not in a document. In the way the body files things. The decisions made. The documents sent. The number of the grain surplus. The road margin. The committee vote on the colony. Filed. Carried. Not resolved. Carried. This was the practice. He walked until the day was in the right place. Then he went home. He had done this for 2 years now. He would do it for 9 more months. The forum did not know. The forum was a square with old stones. And a rostra at one end. It did not know anything. He knew enough for both. He had a system. The system was working. He had a second year. He was using it. This was enough for tonight. The forum waits. It has waited before. It will wait again. The stone holds. The cold holds. The count holds. Writer's note. I do not read Gaius Gracchus as a reformer. I watch him count the exits from the forum every morning. He decided to count them. He made it a decision so it would not become a reflex. His brother had the reflex and not the decision. The difference did not save either of them. But watch the trying. He built the grain law so it touched 300,000 families. He walked the roads himself. He checked the facing of the milestone markers in November, after the election alone. The markers were correct. He had expected them to be. He checked anyway. This is what I keep watching. Not the laws. The checking. Next time, Carthage. The light here is different. No shade before noon.